Last week, we had a discussion about the policing powers of the Ontario SPCA. It got quite a reaction, especially on social media, where the conversation took on a life of its own. Specifically, comments made by one of the guests about livestock got people talking. So we thought it was worth having a follow-up conversation. Joining us now for that, in the nation's capital, Camille Labchuk, lawyer and executive director for the animal rights group Animal Justice. And here in our studio, Bonnie Denhan, dairy farmer who runs Handview Farms. She's also a board member of Dairy Farmers of Ontario. And Bonnie, it's good to have you on the program for the first time.
Yes.
Camille, welcome back.
Good to be here.
Yeah, you got all this started. We should say, well, why should we say it? Why don't we let you have the word on this? Here's what you had to say when you were last on this program not too long ago. Sheldon, if you would.
There's the issue of enforcement in the first place. Right now, enforcement of laws on farms is complaint-based. That's because we don't have proactive inspections. And the reason we don't have proactive, regular inspections of farms is because there are no laws. There's no standards, no regulations governing the lives of animals on farms from the minute that they're born to the day that they're shipped for transport.
Okay, that provoked quite a firestorm on Twitter, and here are some of the tweets that followed. Camille, you followed up with, "There are no regulations or laws setting out animal welfare standards for farms. The industry makes up its own rules." To which we got some response. Here's Catherine Agar. "I love the agenda. It is known for balance and insightful discussion. However, this episode was a huge miss, and I'm questioning the vetting process for guests. S. Pakin, you need to make this right." Catherine Underwood followed up. "You honestly think the general public knows what's best for animals? The separation between rural and urban populations is growing. Caring for your pet is different than caring for cows, chickens, or pigs. The general public has no idea what a cow needs for a healthy lifestyle." And then came Tessa. "Codes of practice are not laws, but they are highly enforced, and the programs have the ability to shut down the farm. You said there are no regulations, standards, or laws, yet there are all three. Pet owners only have to abide by abuse laws, but farms are held to higher standards." And then Bernie Kamphoff came in. "Hey, Camille, thanks for being honest with us, finally, and letting your true colors show. If you wanted all animal agriculture to cease to exist, why didn't you just say so earlier?" Okay, that is only a minor fraction of some of the feedback that we got on social media. So, Camille, why don't we start with you and have you just sort of amplify on your original thoughts that prompted so much response, the notion that there are no laws governing the care of farm animals. Follow up if you would.
Well, I think the general public doesn't really understand that there aren't laws protecting animal welfare on farms. So there aren't proactive standards that set out things like space requirements, for instance. The only laws that do apply are general animal cruelty laws, which kick in after egregious cases of abuse, for sure. But I was surprised by the reaction from farmers because it seemed like many of them didn't understand either that there are no proactive animal welfare regulations on farms. The laws that we do have kick in when animals are transported to the slaughterhouse and when they are slaughtered themselves. But from when they're born until they're transported, there is no comprehensive legal standards and regulations for how they should be treated. And I think that that's inappropriate in this modern age.
Bonnie, what's your response to that?
Actually, there's three layers of regulations and rules on the farm. And the first one is the OSPCA, and they have the authority to enter and inspect and actually seize the animals if they fear that the animals are in harm. Then they can lay charges, and once charges are laid, or even when the OSPCA comes in for an inspection, there's an MOU with the Dairy Farmers of Ontario and just about every other farm animal commodity group to call them in for the inspection as well, just because they have the expertise on what the animals' care should be and how they should look.
You said there's three layers, so that's one?
Yes, that's one layer, and if there are charges, it goes under the Criminal Code of Canada. That's the second layer, that's federal. And the third layer is Dairy Farmers of Ontario have Proaction program, which is quality assurance. And that's exactly as you mentioned. They have space requirements, water requirements, water spacing, feeding requirements, and bedding, and they have all these requirements that you have to meet. And OSPCA, they're not widespread across Ontario. There's lots of pockets of Ontario that OSPCA is not available to. And yet we have, Dairy Farmers of Ontario have field service staff that enter the farms every 2 years unannounced. And
Unannounced
That's
meaning no heads up?
unannounced. No heads up that they're coming. 95% of the Ontario dairy farms have been visited in the last 2 years.
Okay, let's get Camille's feedback on that. Go ahead, Camille.
Okay, well, we're talking about, Bonnie, you mentioned the OSPCA Act and OSPCA inspectors. The OSPCA Act has general prohibitions against abusing animals, so those only kick in after an egregious case of abuse. It's not like they set out standards for the well-being of farmed animals. And in fact, there's explicit exemptions in the OSPCA Act that exempt generally accepted farming practices from those cruelty provisions. So that's certainly not anywhere near sufficient to ensure animal welfare. And then the Proaction program that you bring up, of course, is an industry self-assessment tool. It's not a law. It's something created for farmers by the farm industry. 14 out of 15 voting members that created that are dairy farmers themselves. And I don't trust the industry to police itself. It is literally the fox guarding the hen house. I don't think that inspections every 2 years are something that's sufficient to ensure the well-being of animals on farms. And the practices that code of practice and that the Proaction program allows for are still, frankly, egregious. Things like separating baby calves from their mothers within moments of birth. A lot of people don't appreciate that to produce milk, you have to constantly impregnate cows because they only produce milk when they're lactating after giving birth. So mothers and babies are separated. And when cows and their bodies give out after years of milk production, it's only a couple years actually when their productivity starts to decline, they're sent to slaughterhouses to become hamburger meat. So even the standards that do exist by the industry's own standards are simply not sufficient. We need strong government laws and government inspections.
Okay, a lot to unpack there. How about the fox guarding the hen house type of thing?
Yes, be careful who you're calling the fox. The Dairy Farmers Proaction program is built on the code of practices and best management practices. And I don't know if you're familiar with the National Farm Animal Care Council. They're made up of processors, producers, researchers, retailers, vets, government agencies, and the World Animal Protection Organization even has some input into that. And that's what Proaction is built on. It's not built on the whim of 15 dairy farmers self-governing themselves. This is based on science.
Bonnie, do you know if there are animal cruelty problems on farms in the province of Ontario?
There's bad teachers, there's bad lawyers, there's bad doctors, and certainly there's probably bad farmers. But the system doesn't allow them to exist. So if there's a bad farmer out there, our system is in place that we can identify those farms and identify the problems, and we can shut them down. Like we won't pick up their milk. No one wants to drink milk from an abused cow. So we do not pick up their milk if there is a sign of abuse on the farm. It is canceled. And that more or less shuts that farm down because they can't pay their bills.
Camille, even if the kinds of regulations, legal, with teeth, that you say are not in place, even if in the absence of those regulations, do you have evidence that there is in fact abuse going on farms in the province?
Well, absolutely. We know that there is serious animal welfare problems on farms. So Dairy Farmers of Ontario, it doesn't release its assessment reports. It doesn't release numbers, to my knowledge, on any times farms have been shut down or their milk has not been picked up. We don't know anything about that process, but we do know a little bit about the British Columbia system because some Freedom of Information requests revealed this information. When they implemented a very similar self-assessment process in 2014, over a quarter of farms were found to be out of compliance, even with the industry's own very, very weak rules. And these were things like severely overcrowding cows, not providing enough bedding, having herds where many cows were lame or had very serious leg or knee injuries, and those things are simply not acceptable.
Okay, but
so we need transparency in Ontario.
Sure. I mean, if it's that way in British Columbia, you're sort of inferring that we probably have a similar problem in similar proportions in the province of Ontario, but that's not proof. Do you have proof?
Well, there's no way for citizens to obtain that evidence, Steve, and that's part of the problem. If we had a strong government inspection system, what we would have is laws and standards that set out how animals must be treated, and we'd have inspectors who go onto those farms and produce public reports that the public can access. So the areas where we do regulate animals, transport and slaughter, I can actually get those inspection reports so I know if a slaughterhouse has a problem. But I can't do that for farms, and I don't think that's appropriate.
Bonnie, do you have a transparency problem?
Farm animals are not behind closed doors. We have open houses constantly. There's breakfast on the farm is offered twice a year throughout Ontario. Christmas on the farm is offered at a farm down by Ancaster. There are numerous days on the farm, dinner on the farm down in Niagara. There's so many opportunities, Camille, for you to get out and find out what dairy farming is all about. You've painted a very bleak picture there, but it's not like that on the farm. I live and breathe this every day. I love my animals. There's nothing more content than to go to the barn in the morning and see your cows lying on sand bedding, very clean, calves being born on a nice straw pack in a great environment. There's nothing more satisfying than that. And you've painted a very bleak picture of the dairy industry, and it's not like that at all.
Well,
I live this.
Let me read a tweet here from Joanna Wallace. Again, one of the many, I don't know if it was hundreds, but it was certainly dozens of tweets that we got in reaction to this. Here's Joanna Wallace. In addition to the Dairy Farmers of Ontario regulations we must adhere to, most dairy and other livestock farms have regular vet visits. In our case, a vet walks through our herd every 2 weeks. Animal welfare is paramount. Camille, is that helpful?
No, I think if dairy farmers and other industries too are so proud of these inspections, they should make those reports public, and they should advocate for the government to actually impose laws on their industry. If there's nothing to hide, then there's nothing to hide. But the reality is that animals are kept behind closed doors on farms. Maybe dairy farms sometimes have very controlled open houses. But I want to know what Bonnie thinks about chicken warehouses where chickens are stacked on top of each other in tiny wire battery cages, thousands of them in there. Pig barns where pigs are kept in tiny crates while they're giving birth and while they're feeding their babies in filthy conditions. I don't think that's something the public has access to. And the government should be overseeing those conditions. Right now, they're not.
Well, Bonnie's not a chicken farmer, but if you want to comment on that.
Many of my friends are chicken farmers, and they care for their animals just as much as I do for mine. And when you talk about pigs giving birth in small crates, I really think you need to get out to the farm and visit some farms. And if you go out of, if you make an effort to come out and see a chicken farm and a pig farm and walk in the door, you will be allowed to walk in the door and find out. I think the pictures that you're drawing are sort of imaginary. They're not really what's happening on the farm. And I said we had 3 levels of inspection. We actually have 4. Because we have the vet, we have the feed salesman, we have the seed salesman, we have the neighbors, we have our grandchildren. We live in our barn. We eat breakfast in our barn every morning. So it's if someone drives up the lane and wants to come and talk to us, they're going to have to come to our barn. And when we're in our barn, they're looking at our cows.
Okay, but if somebody's trying to sell you feed, they're not likely to blow the whistle on you, are they?
Certainly they are. That's part of their responsibility. And a veterinarian, when they become a veterinarian, they sign on that they are going to look out for animal welfare issues.
Camille, people are going to want me to ask you, when's the last time you were on a farm?
Well, I grew up in rural PEI, and I've been on many farms in my life. It was part of where I'm from and part of my heritage. The reality is that farmers don't want people on their farms these days. The only way that the public has to effectively oversee what's happening is undercover investigations where someone goes, gets a job on a farm, works there, and is then able to observe consistently, day after day, week after week, the conditions. And what we've seen from those investigations is very troubling. There's only been one of a dairy farm. That was in Chilliwack, British Columbia. There were 9 convictions stemming from that investigation for workers who beat cows with metal rods and pipes, who strung cows up with chains around their neck on forklifts, and who left cows with open, festering wounds. Investigations in Ontario of chicken farms have revealed chickens stuffed in battery egg cages, dead and dying, missing all of their feathers, and sometimes stuck in manure pits below the cages. So I don't believe that this is something that the farming industry wants to see, and I don't think that this model of the fox guarding the hen house is working.
Okay, Bonnie, just let's, for the record, say, any of those things, do you do any of those things to your cows?
No, none of them.
Tell me about
and it's not, you haven't mentioned a case in Ontario, and there hasn't been assault like that on, or animal welfare issues like that in Ontario.
Where's Handview Farms?
Just by Alliston. Just
Alliston, about an hour north of
about
here.
an hour north of here.
How many cows you got?
We milk 70 cows in a voluntary milking system, sand bedding, voluntary feeding.
Family farm?
Family farm.
So
third generation.
You are third generation? Mm-hmm. You got kids?
Yes, we have 2 daughters.
Are they into it?
Yes, and we have a son that's farming, and we also have, our oldest son is a hoof trimmer, does pedicures for cows.
What kind of penalties would you be subjected to if it were discovered that you weren't playing by the rules?
We would be shut off, and
By
that's
whom?
by Dairy Farmers of Ontario. That means the milk truck would not pick up the milk. That's what happens if you're not grade A. So grade A is that you've met all the standards. Your bedding pack is big enough. Your stalls are the right size. You have enough water capacity. You have feeding space for your cows. And your quality issues on your cows. If your cows are living in squalor and being treated the way you talk, you'd have severe quality issues. And in Ontario, we don't have severe quality issues.
So let me ask Camille this then. Camille, if you are unhappy with the current kind of oversight that we have in the province of Ontario, who should be enforcing animal welfare rights?
Well, there should be laws. The government should create laws, and the government should be in charge of enforcing those laws. So this voluntary industry process where the industry comes up with its own codes, in my view, that's something that they've done to avoid being regulated, which is common when industries don't want the government to step in. So I think the government should step in. It should create publicly enacted laws that we, as citizens, can have a say in the creation of. And then, of course, the government should be the one inspecting with regular randomized inspections and inspection reports that are publicly available. That's the only way for the public to have confidence that there's not untoward things happening on Canadian farms.
Okay, but even at the end of the day, if you wanted to put the government in charge of this, that means the government has to hire inspectors. And short of the government hiring hundreds, if not thousands of inspectors, they'll probably hire a couple of dozen, just given the nature of what they're able to do. How much of a dent would that actually put in the problem?
Well, the reality is that the public is already paying for the dairy farm self-assessments. We heavily subsidize the dairy industry in this country. Hundreds of millions of dollars every year go to subsidize dairy farmers and their products. So why don't we redirect those subsidies toward public inspections? It strikes me as ironic that the dairy farmers are happy to benefit from the public purse and from public subsidies, but they don't want public oversight.
Let me just make sure I understand that. When you say public subsidies, you mean supply management?
Supply management, there's constantly grants being given for equipment upgrade, for research, for all kinds of other ways to improve the dairy industry. And that money could be redirected toward oversight.
Bonnie, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, not only have you not been on a farm, I think you need to get educated on the economics of Ontario and Canada dairy industry. We are not subsidized. And we have not been subsidized like forever, not anything in comparison to the United States.
No more than any other business, I guess is what you mean. I mean, you get tax
absolutely.
advantages that every other business gets.
Yes,
right.
yes, yeah. But we do not get subsidized. We do not, like, the industry has invested greatly, but a lot of it has been out of our own pockets.
Well, so maybe we're quibbling over words here. Supply management may not be a subsidy, but it's...
That's a discussion for another day.
And it definitely is a different issue, but...
Today we're talking about
management,
today
but
we're
also
talking about rules and regulations, and you want a provincial organization or policing of the dairy farm. They are going to base their authority on the best management practices and the code of practice that the National Farm Animal Council, Care Council has come up with. And that is processors, producers, vets, researchers, and the world animal. Those are all outside. It's all based on science. The inspectors at Dairy Farmers of Ontario, the field service reps, are authorized by the Ontario Farm Products Marketing Commission, which is an arm of the government. And the authority to run Dairy Farmers of Ontario and their field services reps goes back to the government. So it is.
I've got to give Camille a chance to respond to that.
I mean, what Bonnie's describing is a very industry-led and industry-created process. The codes of practice are created largely by the industry. Sure, there's some representation from government, from scientists, but the codes of practice are designed to protect the industry, and they disregard a lot of scientific information. They still allow for horrific practices like separating baby cows from their mothers a moment after birth. And these inspections, or assessments really is a better term for them, again, they're done by the industry. And I just don't have confidence, and I don't believe that the public has confidence, that the industry is there to protect the animals. The industry is there to protect its profits.
Okay, let me go back to Twitter here for a second, because Camille, in the midst of the online conversation that you were having with many of our viewers, you had this to say. There's nothing sustainable about animal agriculture, which is a leading cause of climate change. More efficient to feed grain to humans instead of to cows for years before we slaughter and eat them. And this raised, a number of questions on Twitter and, about the fact that you're a vegan, right, Camille?
Animal lawyers don't eat their clients, that's right.
Animal lawyers don't eat their clients, okay. Some people, of course, have made the suggestion that that your broader agenda here is, of course, to get us all to be vegans. Is that the case?
Oh, I mean, I don't think that the farming industry is going away tomorrow. So I think that's kind of a distraction from the main point here. The point I wanted to make on Twitter is that people are abandoning meat and dairy products at increasing rates and moving towards alternatives that are better for the environment and often better for human health as well. I think it's really interesting that last week when we had this discussion and the Twitter fight was going on, the Canada Food Guide was revised and released that week, and it actually completely removed the dairy category from the food guide, and it lumped it in with just a general protein category and said that people should be eating more plant-based proteins instead of the animal proteins that we're used to eating. So there's a move toward doing that for human health. The United Nations has said that 17% or more of global planetary emissions come from the livestock industry, and that we won't meet our climate targets if we continue to raise livestock at these levels. So I think that's one thing that's motivating people to shift away from these products.
Do you, Bonnie, think that the real agenda here is to get everybody off meat and dairy and just turn us all into vegans?
That's another day. We can have that discussion another day. But no,
well, you're here right now. Why don't we talk about it now?
People are not going to move away from that. And 20% of our farmland is not croppable. We pasture our cows on there, and they turn grass into milk like magic. And that's an environmental and efficient use of that land, and that's what our ecosystem is all about. For us to move away from animal agriculture would disturb the whole ecosystem in the country. So that's an argument for another day, but we could spend all day on that one.
Well, let's try this. One more tweet here from somebody named Paula, who goes by the Twitter handle Dairy Farm Her. Replying to Camille and others, she tweeted, "Don't forget that I'm a mom too, that cares about the environment. It's also one of our top priorities on our farm. In fact, our carbon footprint, water consumption, and land use associated with the production of a liter of milk have decreased significantly between 2011 and 2016. Camille, is that constructive?
Well, I still think that milk is far more water intensive and far more greenhouse gas producing than the alternatives. So milk, producing cow's milk, takes about 6 times as much water as producing a cup of almond milk, and about 3 times as much water as producing a cup of soy milk. So you can't really compare those on the environmental scale. Plant milks are just clearly better on the environmental front.
Bonnie, clearly Paula believes that the changes that she has made in her situation have been a constructive contribution to reducing climate change. How reflective of the entire province is her situation?
Oh, yes, for sure. Our greenhouse emissions have reduced significantly and will continue to. We have 3 barns on our farm. We have the barn that's 150 years old. And if you want to talk about animal cruelty, go back to 150 years when barns were crammed full and the ceiling was 8 feet high and there was no lighting and no windows and no ventilation system. 40 years ago, my husband and I built a new barn, and it had fluorescent lighting. It had a ventilation system. It had a manure system in it. The cows were really comfortable, and we were like top of the world. Last fall, our daughter built a new barn, and it's a voluntary milking barn. It's like 5 times as big as our old barn for the same amount of cows. And the atmosphere in there, and the energy efficiency of it, and the water efficiency of washing these systems and everything has come so far, so far.
I got 20 seconds. Forgive me for jumping in. I got 20 seconds left here. I don't mean to make too much mischief here. Maybe a little bit of mischief. Why don't you invite her to your farm?
I'd love to. We have a day on the farm in June, on Father's Day weekend on the Saturday. It's called Sheldon Creek Dairy. We also bottle our own milk on the farm. And I would love to give you a personal tour around the farm.
Camille, Bonnie is extending an invitation. You want to take her up on it?
Happily, Bonnie, and I hope you'll get your large mass chicken farmer producer friends to let me into their barns too, but I'm doubtful.
Okay. You know what? We'll take that little moment of consensus we had there and we'll run with it. And let's see what kind of feedback we get to this program. Camille Labchuk from Animal Justice. She's a lawyer as well. We thank you for being there on the line for us from the nation's capital. Bonnie Denhan from Handview Farms, also with the Dairy Farmers of Ontario. We really appreciate you making the long trek into our studio tonight as well.
Thank you.